Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode and we will discuss on a new topic. Are we alone in this universe? We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Professor David J. Kelly, Professor Fred Philip. And especially I want to give thanks to our audience, especially the Southeast Asia, the universities, largest universities, different government agencies, largest corporations, central bank, those who collaborate with us and give us support to launch our business incubations in Bangladesh. And I'm really, really happy. We are engaging with few million peoples, and those who want to join in our research lab, those who want to join in our business incubations, they can collaborate and they can join because developing nation need lot of support and collaboration from developed world. Professor David Smith, what you want to discuss for today's session?
Well, Sharif, you always pick interesting topics, and this is one that is one with many different strong feelings on many different sides of it. But let's kind of come back on this one. There's a lot of press lately about are we alone? And we're beginning to see on Mars, on other moons and planets, we're seeing some of the deep space probes that we're finding some of the elements that can support life, water, other molecules, and things throughout the universe. So it's one that there's a lot of press on today, but it's actually not just a modern inquiry. This goes back through, it's very ancient in its origins, since human beings have begun to ponder these type of big questions. And when they looked up at the stars and saw the moon and saw other planets, they began to get it. One of the places where I first saw this exact question asked was actually in the fourth century BC by Aristotle. And he wrote something called The Polarity of Worlds. And his argument is that there were multiple people around us, but there had to be a prime mover to keep it going. And there and the question was whether there's an infinite number of those or not. So you begin to see the same thing. Some of the other philosophers at that same time suggested, you know, all these worlds, that there had to be ones which would sustain life, and you see that going, and you see Carl Sagan recently began to talk about this and how it's going. But all of those philosophers and the scientists would be very impressed with what we see today. And to get to your questions, are we alone in the galaxy? Well, we haven't had a public first contact. And that's what everyone wants to see, is a public first contact. And the video which you have up on the screen now, Sharif, is actually one of them that was released by an organization called To the Stars Academy, and this came out of the Department of Defense. And that object in the middle is actually a UFO.
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
And these pilots, this is a fighter jet.
That's not an LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like, look at that thing. It's rotating.
These pilots locked onto a whole fleet of them. And this is where the targeting radar of the fighter jet actually locked on it and followed that one. That one went undersea, then it went above 100,000 meters in the sky in less than a minute. So it did things that we cannot explain by physics today. And so you're seeing these type of things. But let's come back to the base question: are we alone? But let's just do the numbers. Kind of in our own galaxy, there are several hundred billion stars. If those several hundred billion stars support planets around us, that's just in our own galaxy. And then we look a little bit further out. There's hundreds of billions of galaxies in the observable universe. God, can those hundreds of billions of galaxies with those 100 billion stars with planets around them, could any of those support life? I mean, the numbers are pretty good. And we see that. I think we're going to see increase things out of the different scientific organizations that we see with those. But one of the other things to consider when you ask the question, are we alone in the universe, is most people think about it will be life from another planet that comes and visits us, or that we discover, that we have that first contact. If I go back and scratch my head back and go into Einstein's theory of relativity, and particularly the third order of Einstein's theory of relativity, we could have visitors that are multidimensionary visitors. We could have a life form from another dimension come and visit us as well. So if I put my science hat on and look at your question, are we alone? God, the numbers say probably we're not alone. If I look at, could it come from another planet? Well, the simple science of a few years ago said that would be tough because we didn't see the elements for life. But now we're finding the elements of life on multiple planets, multiple moons, and outside our own solar system. But the time travel, the amount of time it would take to travel to the Earth was really big. But now we're seeing new scientific theory and actually some proof that we can use the concept of black holes to travel across space much faster than we ever thought possible. So could somebody come from outside to visit here? Sure. But then you go to Einstein's theory of relativity and look at multidimensional travel. And just recently, a group of physicists at 4 universities around the world have published a paper on that. They believe that that type of multidimensional travel is possible. So you've got all these elements coming together which can be there. And we see this question is one that there's not a hard and fast answer that is in the public domain now. But my feeling is that the answer is probably yes. I mean, we know that materials have been discovered which the molecules were not on the Earth and they came from someplace else. But we don't understand those things. So that's my first one. It's a delicate balancing act on this one because you're going to have strong opinions on all the sides. But if I just look at the numbers, if I just look at the science, and if I just look at what we're seeing now, it's almost with all these discoveries that are happening on all the planets in our own solar system and outside our solar system, the radio wave announcements of the last actually 6 months, it's almost as though we're being set up to hear that we're not alone. But that's my first remarks.
Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, what you want to add for today's session?
Well, I must admit, I'm a skeptic. I operate from the assumption that we are alone, even if, sure, statistically speaking, it's likely that we're not. And life is probably more common in the universe than might appear at first glance. However, from a planning standpoint, I tend to work from the fact that we're it. And that drives a lot of the other things that I do with my time. But, there might be something out there, but I haven't seen any evidence, and without testable evidence, it's really almost not worth discussing in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor Fred Philip.
Unmute Fred.
Trying. Yes, thank you, Sharif. I apologize. I have to make a few brief remarks today and then sign off. The question of the day really, we must break down into two questions. Is there life elsewhere, intelligent life elsewhere? I get three questions. And why are they not in contact? So are we alone? Let's make an analogy to you in your workplace with your colleagues. You're obviously not alone, but if no one speaks to you, surely you feel alone. So, yeah, is there life elsewhere? And if so, why have we not been in contact? I don't know whether you chose this topic today because Frank Drake has just died. Is that the reason? He's
Yes.
the author of the famous equation, which is not really an equation, to compute the probability that we might be eventually in contact with intelligent life from elsewhere. One of the components of that equation was the expected lifetime of an industrial society, a high-tech world. Drake took a wild guess at this. He said 10,000 years, and that's what he plugged in. But given what the situation we're at right now, what with climate change and nuclear threat and pandemics and so forth, it might be a lot shorter. In our case, it might end up being a lot shorter than 10,000 years, maybe even just a few hundred years of industrial society. So that would make the probability of contact much less than what Frank Drake had originally said. Now, let's think about where visitors or communicators, because there's also the question of signals from intelligent life elsewhere, where would they come from? You know that our planet is on an undistinguished, far out suburban branch of our galaxy. It's a rather average place. Current thinking is, I believe, that at the heart of the galaxy, where stars are so much closer together, the intensity of radiation might prevent the development of life as we know it. But in the closer suburbs of the center of the galaxy, there could be many stars close together, all of them having planets with life on, and perhaps they've made contact with each other. So we have to think and augment Drake's equation with the consideration that they have plenty of people to talk to. Why should they bother with us? All right, now let's consider that space is a dangerous and uncongenial environment for biological beings, and generally quite congenial for robots. So interstellar travel, and David Smith already mentioned how long it takes in conventional means. Maybe biological beings do not wish to engage in such would have to be multi-generational travel between the stars. So in that case, they would send robots. And, it was widely believed, even among scientists, that the interstellar object Oumuamua that passed our solar system at such high speed a few years ago was an artificial construct, presumably sent to gather data. All right, now, a lot of fiction presents these little green aliens as being highly dangerous, maybe hostile, or if not hostile, carrying diseases, whatever. But who's dangerous? Maybe they think we're dangerous. And so that would speak to the preferability of establishing observation stations, just like in 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? The aliens set up an observation station without making direct contact because, among other reasons, um, if you're traveling interstellar distances and encounter a planet with life, what is the chance that you would arrive at that planet at exactly the cosmic moment when its inhabitants are ready and willing to speak with you or have anything of value to speak with you about? All right, so the rational thing on the basis of what we know at this moment is to explore space using robots and to set up observation stations near planets with uh, with developing and evolving life forms and not make contact until your observation station tells you that it's the right historic moment. So I think, in summary, that it's absurd to believe that there's not intelligent life elsewhere, but there are just a plethora of reasons why they're not talking to us.
Thank you, Mr. Jason.
That's interesting. I think I'll probably end with the question of if there is, why aren't they talking to us? But I'll start out with I kind of agree with David, both of them actually, in a way. Through I didn't know that Drake died, by the way. So that's interesting. Sorry to hear that. Through the Drake equation, there's so many variables, and each one of them variables is hard to narrow down, and so it still leaves things wide open. And I take David Smith's point about just the math of it, the amount of stars, the amount of planets, and but I used to think that wasn't necessarily proof yet because that's kind of assuming that life is springing up on its own here and there. But if panspermia is a real thing, that changes the entire ballgame. If it's possible for an asteroid to slam into a planet with life, kick out a chunk of rock, and then the bacteria or microorganisms on that rock is able to live and land on another planet and live, that changes the entire ballgame. That would raise the chances that there being life spread out throughout the universe much, 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 much greater. But again, it's not intelligent life, but I respect where David Kelly, his mindset, to where, I could be 100% true or 100% convinced that there is through a preponderance of evidence. But when it comes down to testing of that, well, you have to have some sort of thread that is a smoking gun you can start with into that line of thought. You can't really, it's not a testable thing to just use preponderance of evidence in a way. But although, so in that mindset of seeking, testable evidence, that's what led me down the track of looking at ancient archaeology and this whole idea that there was possible well, they call it the flood, but there's a Younger Dryas, I think they call it, event about 12,000 years ago, the end of the Ice Age, and there's this theory that there was a high culture. I won't necessarily say high technology. They obviously had high technology in working with stone because that's all we have left to really judge that by. And I'm led to believe that some of these ancient stoneworks that we see that we attribute to later cultures actually come from this lost higher civilization that was pre that Younger Dryas event. And so, if that then is true, okay, that there was this civilization here, well, what do they say? Those are some of our oldest writings, say it in no uncertain terms that, we were created by the Anunnaki, and it's no big deal. We were a slave race. That's just how it goes. They weren't all, wishy-washy about it, so I sometimes wonder why it is that, we look at old texts in history and we're just so quick to say, oh, well, that they must be just making that all up, and, when writing is first instituted, what would you write down? You would write down your important stuff. You don't just write down a bunch of, novels, made up stuff, so I think we should really take a little bit more stock into what some of them ancient writings do say. And there's a preponderance of evidence that we've been being visited this whole time. Now, to go back to what the other guy said earlier, the real reason why it's not out in the open, I really don't have a good answer for. So that'll be enough for now. Back to you, Sharif.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. You are bringing very interesting point. And what next? So you believe we are not alone. Professor David Kelly believe we are alone. So, so what next? What you want to share for our audience?
Sure. I mean, like I said when I started talking, there's strong opinions on all sides of this issue, and it's there. But David Kelly brought up Drake's equation is there, and Drake's equation is a very complex formula for looking at probability of life in the rest of the world. And for many, many years, Drake's equation was the basis for saying there was not life. But recently, there's been a couple of really interesting papers published on it. One recently in astrobiology, which really takes Drake's equation and changes the numbers in it dramatically. And it's always been, Drake's equation has had big unknowns in it. And part of the big unknowns is we didn't know for a long time about how many stars existed. We didn't know how many of those stars had planets that could harbor life, or how other things might happen. And of course, we had no idea how likely it is that intelligent technology species could evolve. But one of the big things that has been answered in recent science is that the number of stars and stars that have planets are in the twinquillion numbers if you look across all of the galaxies. So there's a lot of that, which changes the essence of part of Drake's equation. N over AST is the number of planets that could support life. And then that and the number of potential species is what comes up with the denominator of Drake's equation to look at life. And Sharif, in your slides, there is actually Drake's equation if you want to pop it up a second. Not the video, but the slide. And that is one that as you begin to look at it, that is the whole Drake's equation formula looking at life. And you really see it. But this paper by two very credible scientists really came back to the conclusion that the probability is really high. And they asked a really interesting question that with this number of possibilities, based on the number of stars, the number of planets, the fact that we're actually finding the means to support life on other planets and things, the question is not really how many civilizations that exist now. The question is, what is the level of technology on all these different worlds? And that's kind of the premise they have uh, done in this paper. And to me, we're seeing it. This particular study is actually on NASA's website and how they've talked about that. And NASA has now set up a new study group inside NASA doing nothing but looking at this question: are we alone in the universe? How we're going to go and handle the places. And the new Webb telescope is continually to giving us new data points that if I go back to Drake's equation, it's pushing the likelihood using Drake's equation higher and higher. And, the ability to look at it and understand where we are, and the fact that uh, the majority of the planets we find can't sustain life like ours. But then we're continually surprised with like the Chinese rover finding signs of water. That our rover on Mars is finding what looks like fossil remains, uh, signs that there clearly was water there before. You're going out to Europa and look at that moon, and you see the complex elements for life are what we've seen from the space probes through the atmosphere. Now, as was said earlier by Jason, it's we haven't seen the little green man there. Well, at least we have not publicly disclosed little green man talking to us. But if I were a government today, and if I was contacted, I'm not for sure I want to publicly disclose it, because I'm not for sure the human species as we are today could actually, uh, with all of our norms and all of the things we have today, I'm not for sure we could understand that we have it and that it could be there. So I don't really view the possibility of we are alone is speculative. I mean, the first part of it is we do exist, and how did we exist? And the second is at least a quarter of the stars in the Milky Way galaxy have a planet like the Earth with surface conditions that are very similar to Earth. And the chemistry of life as we know it we're beginning to see with our chemical analysis of those Earths. So if I take my dice and let me go to Vegas and let me roll my dice on this one, there are tens of billions of stars in the Milky Way. And it's quite likely that we're not alone. And the first public contact will change our view of so many of the elements of our society. It makes conflicts between nations look petty. It makes the differences between countries and races and others like that look petty once we find out that there is a first contact. So, Sharif, I hope this helped a little bit. And David, I can't wait to hear yours.
Yes, Professor David J. Kelly, if you have any argument.
Well, I have so many things that come to mind. I mean, uh, I mean, first, like, even if I mean, first of all, there's like no evidence at all for any kind of alien civilization. I mean, statistically, it's very likely. I get that, but there's no actionable data. Therefore, it's not worth considering. There's just there's no evidence of a prehistory advanced civilization at all. You know, I mean, the closest thing you could look at is you know, some Bronze Age civilizations, and we can see the evidence of that going back, you know, 10,000 years or so. But that's not any kind of advanced civilization. There's likely life all over the place, but again, there's no evidence of advanced civilizations off world, and until there is, it seems to me, it seems superfluous and a waste of energy to bother with it until there's evidence. I think, you know, it's more important to put our resources into getting off world, maybe going and seeing if we can find those civilizations. By all means, I think we should invest in looking for intelligence out in the universe. I think that would be irresponsible if we didn't. But it's also, you know, in my mind, irresponsible for us to not get off world as quickly as possible. And if life isn't everywhere, then we should spread it everywhere, in my opinion. But there's just, I've seen no evidence of any advanced civilizations or aliens or any such thing. As to whether humanity is ready for it or not, probably not. You know, I mean, it'll change. I agree with David on all of that. You know, if we ever find out, you know, it's gonna make all kinds of changes. And in terms of conflicts on Earth being petty, I think they're already petty. You know, I mean, seriously, why should we even have war in this modern era is just blows my mind. You know, the fact that we let people starve, or, you know, we have conflicts or terrorism, it just so irresponsible as a species. But yeah, I guess that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just, this whole alien thing, just no evidence at all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Jason.
Well, I wouldn't say that there is no evidence.
Okay, name one piece of real evidence.
Pumapunku.
That's not evidence.
How can we do that today?
Yep.
How long would it take us? And with
Who
machines?
cares?
And how did they have machines back then? And how did they do it back then?
Oh, dude, we found mechanical computers that are like 3,000 years old.
The Antikythera device. I think the Greek guy did that, though.
It probably, but it doesn't mean there was, you know, power tools 10,000 years ago.
Well, that's what I'm saying. How, you know, there's obviously some sort of, either they were way more advanced than we think they are, or they had some sort of stoneworking technology that we don't have yet today.
I don't think they do anything that we can't do today.
Well, yeah, with machines though.
But well, without machines, what did they do exactly that couldn't be done?
There's all kinds of really unique cuts in andesite rock, like boreholes. How did they drill through?
That could be done. That could be done with relatively primitive tools. It might take a good understanding of physics to do some of that stuff, but that wasn't beyond their grasp. They were not stupid and just as intelligent as us. But that doesn't mean that they were using some magic stuff.
What tool is harder than andesite that they had?
Diamond powder.
Diamond powder. Maybe.
You've gotta look at the simplest solution. Occam's razor, man, in everything.
As far as the panspermia thing, I think the smoking gun on that, for me at least, is if panspermia is true, then that means that we should see life everywhere in our own solar system where it could be. So, like Europa, I would say that if panspermia is true, then we will find something on Europa.
Now that's very likely. We found things that can live in the vacuum of space, or at least survive. So that's at the very least, Earth has contaminated Mars. At the very least. As to how effective panspermia is, but it's certainly doable.
So, what crazy hypothetical question for you? If the government was to like say, "Hey, man, here's $5 billion, design us an experiment to find if whether or not we're alone in the universe," where would you start? I'll just leave it there. What you think about that?
It would be better spent on colonizing.
Oh, yeah, but you got to play the game, you know.
Pretty much go.
There's actually organizations out there where they begin to do that. One of them is there's this whole association called To the Stars Academy, where it's dedicated to looking at this question. You go and look at Bigelow Aerospace. Bigelow Aerospace was the prime scientific consultant to the U.S. government in examining this problem for the last 15 years, and have a lot of strange things. There's a part of their facilities is out in the desert, and strange things happen there all the time that have been documented. And
Skinwalker Ranch.
Skinwalker Ranch.
He owns Skinwalker Ranch, didn't he? Yeah.
Bigelow did Bigelow Aerospace, and it's there. But David, I agree with you a lot of what you're saying, but on the other hand, I also believe that if there had been contact, that would have been, like I said earlier, really privileged information. And
that's probably true.
Been there. But if I begin to go back and look at different elements, some of the recent unidentified aerial phenomena, which is the new name for UFOs, UAPs, they've occurred in really interesting things, and a lot of them have now been documented with using some of the other spectral imaging devices we have. And they're doing things we can't explain. They're doing things that we cannot do it with.
I would buy secret government programs over space aliens.
Well, as I look at these, I don't think the secret government programs can do quite some of the things we've seen, and some of the things that have been recovered, unless we are already multi-planet and have brought back materials that have not originated on the Earth. And if that's the case, that we already are multi-planetarial and we can do that, then your premise, I think, is more solid there. But I also will go back where Jason was going and look at many of the stone carvings from thousands of years ago. I also will go back and look at some of the things that we now have the instruments to measure, such as levels of radiation a few places in the Earth that could only come from not a natural cause, that are thousands of years old, as we now can measure that pretty precisely. And we're seeing those things. the number of pure organizations, if I go and look around the world, it's not just the United States Department of Defense that's looking at this. And now NASA has established this whole new group. I go to Canada, and Canada has 3 different government agencies who have been working this for decades. I go through the EU, I go to every major technology based country, and they all have both classified, I mean, they all have classified groups looking at this, and most of them also have unclassified groups looking at it. You look at what SETI has said lately, the search for extraterrestrial life. They have really revised their numbers of the probability of contact. We're seeing radio waves that there's not a natural way to describe them. We're seeing other elements like that, which I would have a hard time explaining based what I know in the public literature. And I need to keep my comments into the public literature side of this. And we'll see it, but I'm going to almost, Sharif, do my closing type of remarks here in a way, because it just fits so well now. So if I look at this question and I go, again, I am not talking about just space-based other points of us being alone, but also going back to Einstein's theory of relativity and looking at other dimensions. And we now have seen some papers pointing out that they actually can move things interdimensionally and coming back. And the mathematics there really supports that. But if I look at whether we're alone, well, let's just talk about on space side, the sheer size of the universe kind of gives us a high probability that there's other life forms out there. Do they look like us? God, we have no idea. Do they look anything like the, as many whistleblowers have said, the 6 alien species, and I hate the word alien, the 6 otherworld species that have visited the Earth and talked to leaders? I don't know. But if I look at the pure size of it, and God, the numbers are just so high that I could mathematically support a case that we're not alone. But let's go with a couple of other things. In just the last few years, there's just been this tremendous number of leaks, this tremendous number of classified information leaking out, the number of whistleblowers that are really coming forward. You know, one of the really neat ones on that is Paul Hellyer, who is the former Canadian Defense Minister. He has gone in public records as saying other planets have been in touch with the governments of the Earth, and the other whistleblowers have come forward too. But Hellier's claim's interesting in that it has been backed up by at least a dozen retired NASA astronauts. And that surprises me too, is that you have retired astronauts coming out and saying this. And we also know that if I look in Brazil, right off the coast of Brazil, and Brazil is a hotbed of UAP activities. You go to Russia, and there's evidence of crashes in Russia. You go back to Roswell in the United States, and what was there, and what was that cover up, and you begin to look at all of those. You go and see what Jimmy Carter has said about are we alone in the universe? You go and look at what Reagan said. John Podesta was trying to get Barack Obama to promote UFO disclosures. and that's in public record that happened. So just the number of whistleblowers is going really strong. There's also in documented evidence of UAPs that have uh, appeared above nuclear weapon facilities and have shut down the nuclear weapon facilities. Uh, could it be advanced technology from other nations, as David had said? It could be, but boy, that would sure be hard there. Uh, and if you look at the hard documentation that's released, the number of reports, the number of videos, that one video that you showed, Sharif, there have been dozens of other releases like that. You've got releases of commercial pilots taping them on their cell phone as they're flying. And you're seeing documents just going there on. The other thing that's kind of there is all of a sudden there's been all this public debate and press. You've seen governments coming out and very actively saying, gee, we're finding evidence of life. We're finding the material building blocks. And well, I don't think governments would begin to do that if they're totally skeptical it's not there. And, you're seeing that. And the other thing is that as opposed to the past, today, just like I made the comments about the war in Ukraine, it's being documented in a very different way because so many people have the smart devices, so many people have smartphones. You're seeing so there's millions now of YouTube videos out where people are showing us. Yes, a high percentage of those are hoax, I believe, but you're beginning to see it there. And if I put on my scientific hat, this kind of helps me build towards that case. And again, once again, I'm going to make a point. I think there's different data that is in the public domain versus data that is protected by governments all around the world as classified. And I would love to see more of that declassified so we could have a richer debate on this topic. But those are just, some of my thoughts of different points of why I think that the likelihood has dramatically increased of this in the last 5 years of us not being alone. So Sharif, just thank you. This is a hard topic because the data is so segmented and so much of the data is not in the public domain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David J. Kelly, what's your concluding remarks for today's session? Or
I don't know what to say. I mean, I've seen no evidence. Governments, if they know stuff, yeah, it's probably secret and that's probably good. I'm a strong believer in the security of the state.
Well, along those lines, that's where, I totally agree with you that we can't prove it. And so, I can't say you're wrong. Even I might believe it through preponderance of evidence. I can't say you're wrong because we can't prove it. But I do think it's kind of a mistake to just go on with the assumption that it's not true, though. I mean, I think we should have it, and maybe have some sort of plan for if it turns out to be true. And how are we would we deal with that? Me personally, and that's part of why I love your technology, David, because my plan, I thought about it. I'm not probably going to believe it until I talk to one, personally. And who am I to do that? And what would I say? I have no clue. So that's why my idea was maybe get with some sort of collective intelligence thing, and then my first meeting would be through that, and then maybe I could meet them on their own level. Because if it's true, I'm probably an ant, and it, it's probably annoying for them to have to slow down just to talk to me. So I would want to maybe have some sort of machine augmented, intelligence going on before we make contact. That would be my.
So I'm not saying not be prepared, but the worst possible case is and I mean this in a bad way. The worst case is there is nothing else but us, which means we need to preserve intelligence any way we can, off-world, sustainably. And so I have to work from that assumption because there is no proof otherwise. I want to see libraries on Mars. I want to see us off-world and all of that kind of thing. And if there is alien life, I certainly wouldn't tell you if I had talked with space aliens. Especially if there was a technological advantage I could get by knowing that, maybe there's some exchange and I don't know, I think it would be good to have that advantage in forwarding some of the goals that I think we have. And I don't really believe in being publicly transparent in everything. That being said, like I said, I've not seen evidence of it, and I have seen evidence of some pretty way out there tech that is just not publicly available yet, or even acknowledged. So it's
I do really, really appreciate just the way you think, because you're like one of them rare individuals that can take some kind of these kind of abstract things and turn them into something real, like through code, and it is actually now not just a theory, and you're talking about it. So I understand and get it. It's just like David was saying, it's too bad we don't have more evidence.
I'd love to have more evidence, but in the meantime,
what kind of evidence do you think we should even look for?
I would be happy to find bacteria on Mars. That's my next step. And let's pollute Mars with Earth life. What about Io? What's that?
Wouldn't it just blow away if we put greenhouse gases into the atmosphere from the solar wind because it don't have a magnetic field?
I certainly would pollute as much greenhouse gases on Mars as possible. Let's make it. Let's terraform the bad boy, and Io too. I mean, it's already got saltwater oceans under the ice. Let's put some extremophiles down there and spread life like a cancer throughout the universe. I'm all for it. And if we happen to run into space aliens along the way, cool. Let's figure out how to talk to them.
Well, that's a big thing too, and that's what I'm saying. In preparation, if we were to talk to them, I would think that there would be some preparatory things I would want to do before I talk to one. I think I'm kind of smart, but I know I'm not as smart.
Well, let's just get off planet first.
Well, how come you want to get off planet so bad? As far as more than just the obvious, but
look, if aliens can get to us and we can't even get off planet, we're screwed. So let's just get off world, and then we can, that's where the money needs to be spent, in my opinion.
Okay, excellent discussion. Professor David Smith, you want to add any point?
Other than chuckling in the background.
I've enjoyed listening. It's been very good dialogue. And I have good friends, including someone who's won the Lifetime Accomplished Award from the Academy of Physics, who has spent a fair amount of his life understanding this at both the unclassified and classified level. And sitting down and having discussions with him was sitting down and having discussions with the people who ran this program at the Pentagon, with people in some other countries as I've traveled around, particularly in giving briefs in intelligence agencies, and at major research universities. Um, I initially was very skeptical, but as I've seen, and David, I'm going to actually use the term data. As I've seen data, is I've seen spectrographs of what were supposedly wreckage that was recovered from some vehicles that we don't have here, of looking at the chemical composition of those, from looking at people who are very, very smart and have extremely high credibility because they hold some of the highest classifications that nations give to people to protect secret information. Hearing their thoughts on it, um, of taking the time to understand not only the extraterrestrial part, but also the multidimensional parts, and having in-depth discussions with physicists and others around that. My thinking has changed. Uh, and my thinking is, I believe we're seeing it. You know, we're seeing things that defy the laws of gravity. We're seeing things that defy the laws of physics. We're seeing things that would kill any biological life form as we know it today being done with these. I go back and look at history and see stone etchings from thousands of years ago that depict things that we don't understand. As Jason said, I go back and look at some of the things that have been built in different ways, some of the power sources we're just now understanding, looking at deposits of radiation that look like it could only be done if there was a nuclear explosion of some type or a nuclear event of some type. Uh, and people evidence. One of the islands offshore from Brazil, there's tons of documentation that something happened there with a species of some type of creature uh, that is not one that we can understand and put our hands on. Is there a lot we don't understand about this? God, there's tons about it. Is there a lot that is in the classified domain? If I just take my reasonable hat on and look at the number of classified programs around the world and the deeply classified programs around the world that would be above our top secret levels here in the United States. Being a dot connector, I have to see a lot of dots line up to see the number of disclosures of the last 2 years of finding water, of finding chemicals, of finding the number of exoplanets that they're calling Earth clones. The numbers kind of help me there. Have I walked up and shaked the hands with an alien? No. Would that convince me they were here? Yes. But, I haven't done that. But looking at just the evidence I can using the approaches that I use to solve problems with, I think the likelihood is high. And just that we cannot do it today because of a lot of different things. The likelihood of us all being at the same place at the same time just isn't there.
Thank you, Mr. Jason. Any final comments?
Not a whole lot. I do find that evidence that David was saying interesting about the vitrified there's like forts in Scotland. I think we found it in more places than just that, but evidence of vitrified rock that can only happen under like an immense amount of heat. And
It's in about 20 countries we found that.
Yeah, it's not just Scotland, right? Yeah, and if you look at the preponderance of evidence, all of the cultures, it's usually the same story, just different people in it. And it's all usually saying the same story, that we were visited by somebody from out of the sky that taught us this stuff. And Paul Hellyer, I think he's very believable. I just gotta say, he just says it plain out, in certain terms, but I don't know. I'd still like you talk to one face to face, but I don't know what I'd say, so maybe not. I'll just pass it back, man.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you. This is excellent discussion. I'm sure our audience really liked today's discussions. Thank you, Professor David Smith, and thank you, Mr. Jason, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.